When 8-year-old Leo was steered through the clamor of the Westgate Galleria food court by a woman with a grip like iron and a smile like cracked glass, he knew his time was running out. Every instinct screamed at him to run, to shout, to do anything, but fear had frozen his voice and locked his joints. It was in a fleeting moment, when the woman's attention was snagged by a message on her phone, that Leo dared to lift his eyes, his gaze snagging on a tall man in a leather vest. He formed a single, silent word with his lips, a desperate prayer cast into the noise. That silent plea, seen across the crowded atrium by a retired firefighter named Styx, set off a chain of events that would shatter the Saturday afternoon calm and prove that sometimes the most dangerous monsters are the ones who pretend to be mothers. The Saturday afternoon rush at the mall was a familiar symphony of chaos. The air, thick with the competing smells of greasy pizza, sugary cinnamon buns, and the sharp, clean scent of floor polish, buzzed with the energy of 1,000 overlapping conversations. Kids shrieked with delight in the distant arcade. Teenagers laughed in loud, boisterous groups, and parents navigated strollers through the human traffic with the grim determination of Arctic explorers. It was a picture of absolute, unadulterated normalcy. A place so public, so brightly lit, that danger felt like a concept from another world. Seated at a small, sterile table near the coffee kiosk was a man who seemed distinctly out of place. His name was David Riley, but no one had called him that in 20 years. To his brothers in the Iron Sentinels motorcycle club, and to most of the world, he was simply Styx. At 48, he was a tall, lean man, built like a bundle of steel wire. His face was a roadmap of long years on the road and longer nights fighting fires, with lines etched around his eyes and a jaw that seemed permanently set. His dark hair was threaded with silver and pulled back in a short, neat ponytail. Over a plain black t-shirt, he wore his cut. The heavy leather vest was his second skin, bearing the three-piece patch of the Iron Sentinels on the back, a stoic Iron Knight's helmet, flanked by roaring pistons. On the front were smaller patches, an American flag, a memorial patch for a fallen brother, and one that simply read, Engine 12. A quiet nod to the 2 decades he had spent as a firefighter before a back injury had forced him into an early retirement. He was just killing time, waiting for the club's monthly meeting. The coffee was bitter, the chair was uncomfortable, and the noise was giving him a headache. But it was a pocket of peace in a life that was often anything but. He watched the river of humanity flow by, an observer detached from the currents. He saw fathers struggling with shopping bags, mothers correcting unruly children, young couples holding hands. He saw the mundane fabric of life, woven from 1,000 tiny, insignificant moments. Then he saw them. A woman and a young boy making their way toward the main exit. From a distance, they looked like any other mother-son duo. The woman was dressed in a neat floral blouse and pressed slacks, her blonde hair pulled into a tight, efficient bun. She held the boy's hand. But as they drew closer, Styx felt a low, familiar hum of unease in his gut. It was the same feeling he used to get just before a roof collapsed, the subtle shift in the air that signaled imminent danger. His training had rewired his brain. He didn't just see people, he scanned them. He saw details others missed. He saw the boy, who couldn't have been more than 7 or 8. The kid's face was pale, his eyes wide and glassy with a terror that was being actively suppressed. His shoulders were hunched, his posture rigid. He walked like a puppet, his movements stiff and unnatural. He saw the boy's clothes, a bright green t-shirt that was a size too large, hanging off his small frame, and jeans that were slightly too short, showing a pale inch of ankle above his mismatched socks. One sock was blue with red stripes, the other was plain white. A small detail, but it snagged in Styx's mind. Most mothers, especially ones as put together as this woman appeared, didn't let their kids leave the house with mismatched socks. He saw the woman's hand. It wasn't holding the boy's hand, it was clamping down on his wrist. Her knuckles were white with the strain. Her smile, when she leaned down to speak to the boy, was a bright, brittle thing that never reached her eyes. Her eyes were like chips of ice, constantly scanning the crowd, checking the exits, assessing for threats. She looked less like a mother, and more like a prison guard conducting a transfer. Styx took a slow sip of his coffee, his gaze never leaving them. He had seen that look on a child's face 100 times before. He saw it on the faces of kids he'd carried out of smoke-filled apartments, on kids who'd just witnessed something no child should ever see. It was the look of pure, unadulterated fear, masked by a desperate attempt to appear calm. It was the look of a victim trying not to provoke the person who held all the power. The woman was murmuring to the boy, her voice too low for Styx to hear, but the boy's reaction was clear. He flinched, a tiny, almost imperceptible movement, but Styx saw it. Every line of the boy's body screamed tension. He wasn't walking with her, he was being moved by her. Styx lowered his coffee cup, the clink of ceramic on the Formica tabletop unnaturally loud in his own ears. The background noise of the food court faded into a dull roar. His focus narrowed until the only two people in the world were the woman with the cruel grip and the boy with the terrified eyes. He cataloged the inconsistencies, the ill-fitting clothes, the mismatched socks, the white-knuckled grip, the boy's rigid posture, the woman's darting, paranoid gaze. Individually, each detail was nothing. A busy mom in a hurry, a shy kid, a laundry mistake. But together they formed a picture that was deeply, fundamentally wrong. His firefighter's instinct, the part of him that assessed risk and identified anomalies, was blaring like a four-alarm fire bell in his head. The woman paused for a moment, pulling her phone from her purse. Her grip on the boy's wrist loosened slightly as she thumbed a quick message. It was the opening the boy had been waiting for. He stopped trying to be invisible. He took a risk. His head lifted, just a fraction, and his wide, desperate eyes scanned the crowd. They passed over families, over teenagers, over security guards. Then they locked with Styx. For a single, heart-stopping second, the world stood still. In that moment, Styx saw everything. He saw the terror, the pleading, the sliver of hope that was almost extinguished. The boy's mouth was a tight line, but he worked his jaw, and his lips formed a single, perfect word. There was no sound, not a whisper, but Styx read it as clearly as if it had been shouted through a bullhorn. Help. The blood in Styx's veins turned to ice. The low hum of unease became a deafening siren. It was real. This was not a misunderstanding. This was not an overactive imagination. This was happening, right here, right now, in the middle of a crowded mall on a bright Saturday afternoon. The woman finished her text and pocketed her phone, her grip tightening once more. She tugged the boy forward, and the connection was broken. But the image of that silent plea was seared into Styx's brain. The quiet coffee break was over. The retired firefighter was back on duty. He didn't think. He acted. For a split second, the voice of societal conditioning whispered in his ear. What if you're wrong? You're a big, intimidating guy on a good day. In your MC cut, you look like every parent's worst nightmare. You're going to make a scene. You'll be embarrassed. You could be arrested. You could be accused of being the very thing you're trying to stop. The voice was drowned out by another louder one, the voice of a man who had run into burning buildings while everyone else was running out. The voice that said you never, ever ignore a call for help. The risk of being wrong was embarrassment. The risk of being silent was the life of a child. It was no choice at all. Styx pushed his chair back, the legs scraping harshly against the tile floor. He stood to his full 6'3" height, a sudden, imposing figure of leather and denim. He left his half-finished coffee on the table and started walking, not running, but moving with a long, deliberate stride that ate up the distance between them. The woman and the boy were nearing the glass doors that led to the parking garage. 10 more seconds and they would be gone. Styx angled his path to intercept them, a human roadblock. He didn't reach for them, didn't shout. He simply planted himself directly in their path, his arms crossed over his chest. His face was a neutral mask, but his eyes were locked on the woman. She saw him, and her forward motion stuttered to a halt. For a fraction of a second, a flicker of pure animal panic flashed in her eyes, before being replaced by indignant rage. She pulled the boy behind her, shielding him as if Styx were the threat. "Excuse me," she said, her voice sharp and cold. "You're in our way." Styx didn't move. He ignored her completely and looked past her shoulder, his gaze softening as he focused on the boy. "Hey, kid," he said, his voice a low, calm rumble. "You doing okay?" That was the spark that lit the fuse. The woman's face contorted into a mask of outrage. "What did you just say? Who do you think you are?" Her voice rose in volume, turning heads nearby. "Get away from my son. What do you want with him?" Styx held her gaze, his own expression unwavering. "I'm just asking the boy if he's all right." "He's fine," she shrieked, her voice now attracting a small crowd. "He's fine until strange men in biker jackets start harassing him. Security! Somebody call security! This pervert is trying to talk to my child." The accusation hung in the air, thick and poisonous. People were stopping, pulling out their phones. Whispers rippled through the onlookers. Styx felt the weight of their stares, the immediate judgment in their eyes. He was the villain in this picture. The big, scary biker accosting a mother and her child. The woman was playing her part perfectly, her voice trembling with manufactured fear and maternal rage. Two mall security guards, a young man and an older paunchy officer, hurried toward the scene, their radios crackling. "What's going on here, ma'am?" the older guard asked, his eyes immediately wary of Styx. "This man," the woman cried, pointing a trembling finger at Styx. "He came out of nowhere. He's been following us and he tried to grab my son. He's some kind of creep." Styx stood his ground, calm amidst the storm he had created. He knew that any aggression on his part would only validate her story. He slowly raised his hands, palms out, a universal sign of non-aggression. "That's not what happened," he said, his voice steady. He looked at the security guard. "I saw them in the food court. Something wasn't right. The boy looked scared. He asked me for help." "He did not," the woman shrieked. "He's lying. He's a monster. My son is terrified of you. Look at him." She pulled the boy tighter against her leg. Leo was trembling, his face buried in the fabric of her slacks, his small shoulders shaking with silent sobs. To the crowd, it looked like a child terrified of a monster. But Styx saw it for what it was. A child terrified of the woman he was clinging to. The older guard, whose name tag read Henderson, looked from the hysterical woman to the stoic biker. He was caught in the middle, and procedure was his only shield. "Sir, I'm going to have to ask you to step away. You're upsetting the lady and her child." "I'm not moving," Styx said, his voice dropping to a low, firm tone that allowed no argument. "Not until I know that boy is safe." "Sir, if you don't cooperate, I'll have to call the police," Henderson warned. "Good," Styx replied without hesitation. "Call them. I want you to." This gave the guard pause. Crazies and criminals didn't usually invite police involvement. The younger guard was already speaking into his radio. The woman's performance intensified, her sobs becoming more frantic. "Please, just make him go away. We just want to go home." Styx looked at Henderson, his eyes hard with conviction. "Before the police get here, ask her a few questions," he said, his voice low enough that only the guard could hear. "Ask her the boy's full name. Ask her his birthday. Ask her what school he goes to." Henderson's eyes narrowed. Those were simple questions any mother could answer in a heartbeat. He looked at the woman, then back at Styx, a flicker of doubt crossing his face. Two uniformed police officers arrived within minutes, parting the crowd of onlookers. One was a tall, stern-faced man in his 50s, Sergeant Miller. The other was a younger, sharp-eyed female officer named Chen. Miller took charge immediately. "All right, what's the situation here?" The woman launched into her story again, a torrent of accusations and tears. Miller listened patiently, his expression unreadable. Officer Chen, meanwhile, approached Styx, her hand resting lightly on her service weapon. "Sir, I need you to tell me your side of the story," she said, her tone professional but not accusatory. Styx calmly and concisely recounted everything he had observed: the tight grip, the boy's fear, the mismatched socks, the mismatched story in his gut, and finally, the silent, mouthed plea for help. "My name is David Riley," he finished. "I was a firefighter with Engine 12 for 21 years. I know what a scared kid looks like, and that kid is scared to death of her." Officer Chen's expression remained neutral, but she made a note in her small pad. The mention of his past service carried weight. Sergeant Miller, having finished with the woman, came over. "She says you were stalking them, that you tried to lure her son away." "And I say she's lying," Styx said simply. "I told the security guard, ask her simple questions, ask her the boy's birthday." Miller nodded slowly. "We did. She said she was too flustered to remember it correctly." Said you had her all turned around. He looked past Sticks toward the boy, who was still hiding his face. But she also couldn't tell us his teacher's name. A small crack had appeared in the woman's story. The mall has cameras everywhere, Sticks said. Check the footage from the food court from the last 10 minutes. It will show you everything. Miller looked at Henderson, the security guard. Can you take Officer Chen to your office and pull that up? Focus on the main food court and this exit. Yes, sir, Henderson said, suddenly eager to be useful. He led Officer Chen away. Sergeant Miller turned back to the woman. Ma'am, we're just going to review the security tapes to clear this all up. If you and your son could just wait over here with me. The woman's face, for the first time, lost its mask of maternal grief. The panic that Sticks had seen earlier returned, stark and undisguised. Review the tapes? That's ridiculous. I'm the victim here. I'm going to file a complaint. This is harassment. It's just standard procedure, ma'am, Miller said, his voice hardening slightly. The shift in her demeanor had not gone unnoticed. The next 10 minutes felt like an eternity. The crowd was pushed back, but they lingered, hungry for a conclusion. The woman paced back and forth, muttering to herself, her grip on the boy's arm now painfully tight. Sticks stood perfectly still, a silent, leather-clad statue, his entire being focused on the outcome. He had rolled the dice. Now he had to wait and see how they landed. Officer Chen returned, walking with a brisk, urgent pace. She didn't look at the woman or the crowd. She went straight to Sergeant Miller and spoke in a low, intense voice. Sergeant, we have a problem. Miller listened, his face growing grimmer with every word Chen spoke. He nodded, then looked over at the woman. His expression was no longer neutral, it was glacial. The footage shows you grabbing the boy near the West Arcade, not the food court, Miller said, his voice flat and cold. It shows him trying to pull away from you, and it shows you dragging him toward this exit. The woman's face went ashen. No, that's not true, the camera is wrong. And then, Miller continued, his voice rising, just before you got here, we see the boy look directly at this man. He gestured to Sticks. And we see him mouth the word, help. We zoomed in. It's crystal clear. A collective gasp went through the remaining onlookers. The narrative had flipped, violently and completely. The villain was not the biker. The woman made a break for it. She shoved the boy forward, into Sergeant Miller, and sprinted for the doors. She was fast, fueled by adrenaline and desperation, but she didn't get 5 feet. Officer Chen, anticipating the move, tackled her in a clean, decisive motion. The woman went down hard on the polished tile floor. The fight went out of her instantly. As Chen cuffed her, she began to sob, but this time the tears were real, tears of failure and capture. The immediate crisis was over. The threat was neutralized. Sergeant Miller gently put his hands on the boy's shoulders. It's okay, son. You're safe now. The boy, Leo, finally looked up. His face was streaked with tears, his eyes wide with shock, but the frozen terror was gone, replaced by a dawning, fragile relief. He was safe. The aftermath unfolded in the quiet, sterile confines of the mall security office. The woman, whose name was Sharon Gable, was a non-custodial aunt with a history of mental instability who had abducted Leo from a park 2 hours earlier. An Amber Alert was just about to be issued. Leo was wrapped in a thick security blanket and given a cup of hot chocolate that he held with trembling hands. A female officer sat with him, speaking in soft, reassuring tones. Sergeant Miller found Sticks standing just outside the office, leaning against a wall as if holding it up. The adrenaline had faded, leaving him feeling hollowed out and weary. Riley, Miller said, extending a hand. Sticks shook it. That was a damn good piece of police work. I'm not a cop, Sticks said quietly. Could have fooled me, Miller replied with a small smile. You stayed calm, you read the situation, and you didn't back down. Most civilians would have folded the second she started screaming. You saved that kid's life today. Thank you. The validation was welcome, but it wasn't what Sticks needed. What he needed was to see the story through to its proper ending. That ending arrived 20 minutes later in the form of a frantic woman with red-rimmed eyes and a face etched with pure panic. This was Leo's mother, Jessica. The police had reached her, and she had raced to the mall, fearing the absolute worst. She burst into the office, her eyes scanning wildly, until they landed on the small figure huddled in the chair. "Leo!" The boy's head shot up. "Mom!" He dropped the cocoa and launched himself from the chair, running into his mother's arms. She collapsed to her knees, clutching him to her chest, as if she might never let go, her body shaking with convulsive sobs of pure relief. It was a reunion of primal, desperate love, a raw and powerful moment that made everyone else in the room look away, granting them their privacy. After several long minutes, Jessica composed herself enough to speak to the police, stroking her son's hair as he clung to her. Sergeant Miller explained the situation, how the abduction had happened, and how it had ended. As he spoke, he gestured toward the hallway where Styx was still waiting. And if it weren't for him noticing something was wrong, she would have been out of that garage and gone. Jessica looked up, her tear-filled eyes following Miller's gesture. She saw Styx standing there, his imposing frame, his leather vest covered in patches, his weary expression. He was everything she had ever taught her son to be wary of, a stranger who looked rough and intimidating. For a fleeting moment, she felt a jolt of the very prejudice he had faced in the food court. Then she looked at her son, safe and whole in her arms, and she understood. Slowly, she stood up, holding Leo's hand, and walked over to Styx. He straightened up as she approached, his posture suddenly a little awkward, as if he were unused to this kind of attention. You're the man who helped my son?" she asked, her voice thick with emotion. Styx just nodded. "I'm glad he's okay." Tears began to stream down Jessica's face again, but these were tears of gratitude. "Okay? He's okay because of you. The police told me what you did, how you stood up to her, how you took the risk." She took a shaky breath. "When they described you, I'm ashamed to admit what I first thought. But you didn't just see a stranger. You saw my little boy." She reached out with her free hand and placed it on his arm, on the thick leather of his cut. "Thank you," she whispered, the words loaded with the weight of a world of gratitude. "Thank you for seeing him." Styx looked down at the boy, who was peeking out from behind his mother's leg. Leo gave him a small, shy wave. Styx's gruff exterior softened, and a rare, small smile touched his lips. He gave the boy a slow, deliberate nod. It was a gesture of respect, an acknowledgement between two people who had shared a moment of profound importance. A guardian and the person he was sworn to protect. 1 year later, the Westgate Community Park was buzzing with life. Brightly colored balloons danced in the breeze, and a large banner strung between two oak trees read, "Leo's Lookouts. See something, say something." Jessica, Leo's mother, stood at a small podium, speaking to a crowd of parents and children. She was no longer the frantic, terrified woman from the mall. She was poised, confident, and filled with a fierce purpose. After the abduction, she had learned that the worst thing you can do is let fear win. She had channeled her family's trauma into action. "We teach our kids about stranger danger," she said, her voice clear and strong. "But sometimes the danger doesn't look like a stranger. Sometimes it looks like an aunt, or a neighbor, or someone who says they know your mom. The most important tool we can give our children is the confidence to know that their feelings matter. If a situation feels wrong, it is wrong. And the most important thing we can teach ourselves," she added, her eyes scanning the crowd, "is to pay attention. To listen to that little voice that says something isn't right." Standing at the edge of the crowd, arms crossed, was Styx. Next to him stood 3 other members of the Iron Sentinels MC, their cuts gleaming in the sun. They were not the event's security. They were its primary sponsors. Their club's insignia was printed on the back of the free t-shirts being handed out to the kids. After the incident at the mall, Styx had stayed in touch with Jessica and Leo. The connection forged in that moment of crisis had solidified into a firm, unlikely friendship. When Jessica decided to start the community safety program, the Iron Sentinels had been her first call. The club, often viewed with suspicion by the town's more conservative residents, had voted unanimously to fund the entire initiative. The story had spread. The image of the big, scary biker saving a child had a powerful, mythic quality. The Iron Sentinels were no longer just a group of loud men on loud machines. They were seen as guardians, as protectors. Donations to their annual Christmas toy drive had quadrupled. When a family on the east side of town lost their home in a fire, the Sentinels were there the next day, not just with a check, but with hammers and tool belts, helping them rebuild. When Jessica finished her speech to a round of applause, Leo, now a confident 9-year-old, ran from the stage. He didn't run to his mother. He ran straight to Styx. "Styx!" he yelled, a huge grin on his face. Styx's smile was genuine now, as he knelt down to the boy's level. "Hey, superstar, you were great up there." "Did you see how many people came?" Leo asked, bouncing on the balls of his feet. "We're helping other kids, just like you helped me." "You're the one helping them, Leo," Styx said, ruffling the boy's hair. "You're the brave one." Jessica joined them, a warm smile on her face. "He talks about you all the time. You're his hero." Styx just shrugged, a little uncomfortable with the praise. "I just did what anyone should have done." "No," Jessica said, her expression serious. "You did what you did. Everyone else just walked by. You saw him. Don't ever think that was a small thing." Later that evening, Styx was on the road, his Harley thrumming beneath him. The sun was setting, painting the sky in fiery strokes of orange and purple. His brothers rode in formation around him, a rolling bastion of chrome and steel. They were heading back to the clubhouse, the day's work done. He thought about the fire department, about the rush of saving a life, the ache of losing one. He had thought that part of his life was over when he'd turned in his gear. He had believed that his purpose had been retired along with his body. He had been wrong. The uniform had changed, from a fire-retardant suit to a leather cut. The vehicle had changed, from a screaming fire engine to a rumbling motorcycle. But the mission was the same. The instinct to run toward trouble, to shield the vulnerable, to be the wall between the innocent and the dark, that had never left him. It was woven into the fiber of his being. As they rumbled through the quiet suburban streets, he saw a family on their porch. A mother, a father, a small child waving enthusiastically at the procession of bikes. Styx lifted a hand from his handlebars and gave them a slow, deliberate nod. He was not a cop. He was not a firefighter anymore. He was a biker. He was a sentinel. He was a quiet guardian on a long road, his eyes always scanning, forever watching over his flock. And he was right where he needed to be.